The Cal Golden Bears made it quite interesting at the Coliseum, but USC too much offense, too much speed, and they march on to another victory. And we talk USC football with all of you each and every Monday night at 11 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock where it counts on the West Coast with Matt Zemek, Trojans Wire for a 27th consecutive week. Our thanks to Matt for making this happen. Matt, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. You know what? I think it's perfect as a website editor when you get the win and the team's overall big picture best interests are furthered, but you have a lot of controversy underlying that. So really the perfect marriage of victory and spicy controversy at USC. It's a really good mix. And the Cal game expected to be boring. Nope. That was not the case. I mean, for a period of time, 34-13, 34-14 after 3, you think you're going to put it to bed. It didn't end very peacefully. And so we have a lot to talk about here at the Voice of College Football.
Unfortunately, with USC playing these later games, most of the time I'm sitting right here during much of the game and keeping an eye out for it. And yeah, I was tracking the score, but you can't get a feel for the context of the game and obviously how well anyone's playing. But was there a point late in that Golden Bears rush to the finish that, the final score was closer than the indication of most of the action on the field for most of the game? Was there a point in that fourth quarter when Cal legitimately had a shot to possibly pull it out?
Well, so it was 41-35.
Yep.
With about 2 minutes left, and USC had a 3rd and 5. And if USC doesn't convert that, Cal gets the ball back. And Jack Plummer, the Cal quarterback, had thrown for over 400 yards. He roasted and toasted USC's secondary, which is in a state of free fall. So you think, if Jack Plummer gets the ball back, all right, he has to drive probably about 85 yards. So like you're not thinking, well, it's money in the bank for Cal, but like you're thinking, oh, like Cal really could do this. But Caleb Williams converted the 3rd and 5. So like it was for a brief moment, it was hanging in the air a little bit. And the thought went through every USC fan's mind. Could this actually happen? I mean, we actually got that far down the line. So, a 6-point game, it was probably a 2-touchdown game in terms of how close it was overall. I mean, USC was up 20. But it's the idea that it was a 6-point game. So it was 1 touchdown closer than it should have been. And it almost, unraveled to the point where Cal had a chance with the rock in the final 2 minutes. And so this is a recurring theme now. Like we saw it against Utah. USC was up 14. Obviously that game got away from them. And then USC was up 31-16 midway through the second half against Arizona. That became a 31-29 game in a heartbeat. So like we're seeing this team giving up a lot of 13-point, 14-point runs. So going up 2 touchdowns has meant nothing the past few weeks. Each of the 3 opponents, after going down by a sizable margin, has immediately scored 2 touchdowns in a row at some point to make things really interesting. And it's just fascinating to contemplate. In the first 6 weeks of the season, this defense was it was great against Oregon State, and it was okay in some other games, but it was not terrible. Like Alex Grinch was greatly surpassing expectations. The defense legitimately won the Oregon State game. You could say it was like a 50-50 split in terms of the defense and the offense sharing the load against Washington State. The defense shut out Washington State in the second half of that game. And one of the things you saw in the first 6 weeks of the season, no home run pass plays. This defense was not getting beaten over the top, was not getting lost in downfield coverage. And it's just fascinating to contemplate, Mark, because Eric Gentry being out, like we knew the defense was going to be worse without him. He got injured late against Utah. So like when it became known that he wasn't going to play against Arizona in week 9, before kickoff, you're thinking, oh, like Arizona has Jaden DeLora and some elite wide receivers, Tetaroya, McMillan, Jacob Cowing, Dorian Singer, like they can all really play. And so you're thinking, yeah, this is going to be a rough ride for the defense. So coming out of the Arizona game, it was all right, this was not really all that surprising. Like, this was going to be a bumpy ride. They got through it, and so the hope was, okay, that's a wake up call. This is a call to action for Alex Grinch and the defense. And now we have an opponent which we can fatten up against. Now we have an opponent we can feast against with Cal. And our Cal guest insider Jake Curtis. We heard him talk about how awful that Cal offensive line truly was, and he talked about how Bill Musgrave, Justin Wilcox's offensive coordinator, is probably going to be fired at the end of the season. So this was a sinking ship for Cal. This was a team that lost at Colorado, scored only 13 points at Colorado, and Colorado gets lit up like a Christmas tree every week. So this was the team, this was the offense that USC's defense, even with the injuries, even with Eric Gentry out, even with Raylan Goforth out, this was still a team you're supposed to feast on. And instead, Jack Plummer looks like Aaron Rodgers. That was a comment that a lot of USC fans were making during this game, that he looks a lot like another Cal quarterback, from nearly 20 years ago. So when you turn Jack Plummer into Aaron Rodgers, Jack Plummer, surpassing 400 passing yards, that's exactly what Cam Rising did. Now, Cam Rising's a really good quarterback. If you're turning Jack Plummer into Cam Rising or Aaron Rodgers, take your pick, something's really wrong. And it can't just be the fact that Eric Gentry's out. I mean, I know that you're trying to make some adjustments, but Eric Gentry doesn't cover receivers down the field one-on-one. He's a linebacker. So I know that in the secondary, we can say, obviously, guys are really thinking about, USC has basically no healthy linebackers because Shane Lee is still playing with the cast and he's still not 100%. Raylan Goforth also out. So obviously the guys in the secondary, they're clearly preoccupied with, supporting the linebackers in run support, also pass coverage. And it's really cluttering their minds. They're not processing plays clearly, but even when accounting for the injuries and even when accounting for the thin roster, it shouldn't be this Grand Canyon-sized gulf between what we saw in the first 6 weeks of the season. I mean, falling off a cliff like this, just because Eric Gentry's out, that's overstating how much Eric Gentry means. I mean, the secondary has profoundly regressed. Sierra Wright really being, I think, the foremost example. He held up pretty well in pass coverage the first half of the season, made some good plays in that big win over Oregon State in week 4 in Corvallis. He was lost, and he had to be replaced by Jacoby Covington in this game, and Grinch was trying to find replacements and an answer that really worked. One commentator that I follow on Twitter, a USC analyst, he noted that Domani Jackson's absence, he was injured, that when he's on the field, it reslots a lot of the guys in the secondary into better roles that make more sense, especially in dime packages. So you can also identify that. But Domani Jackson, he's not played a heavy amount of snaps this season. So the idea that he is a cornerstone of this defense, that would be pushing it too far. I don't think you can really say that. So, there's injuries, there are depth pieces that are missing, and guys aren't in a fully comfortable position. But again, it shouldn't matter that much against Cal. It really shouldn't. It should never have remotely gotten to this point. And I think as we get to really the heart of this conversation about Alex Grinch and the job he's doing, we do need to realize that USC's 8-1. And he still has overall, through as a 9-game body of work, he's still exceeded expectations through 9 games. But we've had now 3 straight train wrecks. So problems aren't getting fixed. You're still seeing the missed tackles. The secondary, after the Arizona game, did not fix any of its problems against Cal. So you have to wonder, the coaching is not getting through right now, not on the defensive side of the ball. Now, Alex Grinch, he's a stand-up guy. He'll say, and he did say after the Cal game, it's coaching. I'm not coaching well. I have to do better. And he's good at owning his mistakes, but you can own all the mistakes you want. You're not hired at USC to just spend every weekend owning mistakes. You have to actually fix this thing. And so we have a situation where, I think Alex Grinch should get the 2023 season. I think he should be retained. But, if the UCLA and Notre Dame games go sideways, as these past 3 games have gone against Utah, Arizona, and Cal, like, it's a real conversation, right? Like, not saying that he should be fired by Lincoln Riley, but like, we would have to talk about it going into the offseason. And that would be really unfortunate given how well the first 6 weeks of the season went. When he was a Broyles Award candidate, he was in the mix. He was doing such a great job. And then 3 straight games where the team and specifically the secondary fall off a cliff. It's a really weird turn of events, right? Because you knew going into the season that this defense was going to struggle, and that Alex Grinch wasn't dealing with a fully stocked roster, a fully stocked depth chart. So the fan base was ready and willing to cut him some slack. And I think that's still warranted. Like, you don't forget the first 6 weeks of the season based on these last 3. But like, we weren't expecting the defense to be better in the first half of the season, right? You and I talked a lot about how, is this defense going to be good enough for Oregon State in week 4? That key game, this defense is probably going to be better later in the year. It's been just the opposite. And again, we know Eric Gentry, but it has to be about more than one guy. Like, one guy should not be, that important to the whole operation. So Alex Grinch faces some real questions right now. Like, he has to be at least half decent against UCLA. And I'm not expecting USC to stand on its head and be great, but here's the backdrop. UCLA scored 62 on the Todd Orlando, Dante Williams defense last year. So it invites the point that if this USC defense gives up 60 or 55 to UCLA, which right now seems pretty possible, you really do have to wonder, is Alex Grinch the right guy to coach this defense in 2023 and then to lead the USC into the Big Ten? I think you give him 2023 no matter what, but entering an off season in which there are serious questions about Grinch, we weren't here a month ago saying that. We weren't even thinking about that. We were thinking, wow, he's justified Lincoln Riley's loyalty. He's really delivered the goods. He's really answered the bell. And 3 straight weeks of horrible performances. It's certainly a fascinating plot twist that USC was so solid, not great, but solid, competent, doing what, more than a lot of people expected in 6 weeks. And in the last 3 weeks, without any adjustments, without any course corrections, it unravels. We'll see if Alex Grinch can get this thing back on track.
I've got 3 thoughts for you, Matt, that may mean something, or they may be completely coincidental and may, again, not mean anything, or they may tie into this narrative that you're building. Few things come to mind. Number one, that the USC defense, at least at one point in the season, and probably the point that you're alluding to, the competency point in the season, was among the nation's leaders in pass interceptions. Now, that's a great statistic, and great defenses turn over the offense and create big plays and do that. But there is a randomness, not just to fumbles and fumble recoveries, but to also interceptions. There were deflected passes, and again, that can be great play, but that can also be a bit of luck going USC's way, and that's fallen off. Number one. Number two, and again, you're talking to a guy that watched the game out of the corner of his eye while he's talking, other games with call-in folks. Bryson Shaw at Ohio State last season was, I believe, the second leading tackler on the defense for an Ohio State defense that was one of Ohio State's worst defenses in decades. It was not a good thing that he was the second leading tackler in the game. I look at the box score and I see that he made 11 tackles to lead the defense and 10 solo tackles.
That's right. Yeah, he's been excellent in terms of making tackles on a team which is struggling to make tackles. And yeah, that tells you that the linebackers are really struggling to make tackles in front of him. And that speaks to how threadbare the linebacker group is. All right, you had a third item.
The other third item would be the passing effectiveness of this Cal offense is even accentuated by their inability to run the ball. So as last week's guest, Jake, told us, they got a bad offensive line. They can't run the ball against anyone. And so USC knows Cal can only run or pass the football. They can't run it. And they proved that they can't run it at 2.6 yards per carry. But voila, they still couldn't stop the pass.
Yeah, so this brings up a particular point. So I'm glad you raised that point, especially. Against Utah, USC and Alex Grinch were playing the run. They were trying to take away Tavion Thomas. And so Andy Ludwig, the offensive coordinator for Utah, he realized I just need to throw the ball, and I need to go to Dalton Kincaid in the passing game with Cam Rising. And Alex Grinch never made the adjustment. He was still playing the run. And it would have been great if USC was giving up 4 or 5 yard handoffs, because that means you're not throwing a 20-yard pass to Dalton Kincaid down the field. And so against Arizona, Grinch did play the pass more. And I think it was somewhat easier for Grinch to do that because of the great receivers that Arizona has. So that Arizona, it's unambiguous. Arizona leads with its passing attack. Arizona is a pass first team. That was so the concepts were easier for Grinch to play the pass in that game, but not against Utah. So you go over to Cal, and it's clear that Alex Grinch wanted to take away Jaden Ott. And let's remember that he rushed for 274 yards against Arizona early in the season. But once it became clear that Cal couldn't establish the run, you should be focused more on pass defense, and especially with a 20-point lead entering the fourth quarter. By then, it was known that Cal was going to throw, and yet the coverages were soft. Cal was getting these slants and short intermediate routes with great consistency. Cal converted stacks of 3rd and 8, 9, 10, 11 in this game. And I mean, this coverage was not as soft earlier in the season. And it could just be human nature. Like, we're up 20, got game over, and the guy's mentally checked out. I mean, to an extent, that's part of it. But, that's where I get back to how course corrections were not made from the previous week. That USC had the 31-16 lead against Arizona, and then that became a real close game, with Arizona scoring 13 straight points to make it 31-29. So after that experience, right, and after blowing the 14-point lead against Utah, you would think that in a third week, guys are going to be drilled on not relaxing with a 14, 15, 20-point lead. You would think that the message from the coaching staff is going to get through. Play hard, finish, keep doing what you're doing. Don't relax, don't relent. And that's not getting through. The coaching, the messaging is not getting through. And so when that is part of the reality,
oh my goodness,
I don't know where that's coming from.
That's on me. That was part of the graphic I had put up. I should have anticipated that might happen, even though I shut down all the volumes. But anyway, go ahead. My apologies.
Yeah, no problem. So the fact that the messaging really isn't getting through, like that, when that happens, like, you have to really be serious about questioning what the coaching is doing and how guys are going about their business. So no corrections from previous weeks. Like, previous weeks were supposed to have been a wake-up call, and they weren't. And let's add the fact that on October 22nd, USC didn't play. It's like USC had 2 weeks off. Grinch had 2 weeks after the Utah game to adjust to the Eric Gentry injury. Eric Gentry got injured late in the Utah game. So we knew going in to that off week that, all right, how do I align my defense without Eric Gentry? And how do I teach my players, to adjust in terms of their roles and responsibilities? So there was time to actually be on the practice field and adjust to the new normal, not a better normal, but the new normal. And then the Arizona game happens, and didn't go great, but we got through it. And so really just the lack of improvement against an opponent where improvement should have been expected, like that just raises a serious concern about Alex Grinch's coaching. Now let's deal with one other somewhat related topic. Who coaches the defensive backs, particularly the cornerbacks for USC? Dante Williams, who is the one holdover on the assistant coaching staff from the Clay Helton era. And so part of the Alex Grinch question in terms of, is he the right defensive coordinator for Lincoln Riley and USC, going forward? We have to ask that about Dante Williams. And, the fact that he, was retained by Lincoln Riley, that was a real show of faith. It was also an expression of how good a recruiter Dante Williams is. If we don't see some improvement against UCLA and Notre Dame, the questions that we've raised about Alex Grinch, they need to be asked of Dante Williams, and specifically of Dante Williams. Is his value as a recruiter worth the quality of coaching that he is providing to the corners and to the USC's defense against the passing game? He's the passing game coordinator for this USC defense. If we don't see improvement against UCLA Notre Dame, Lincoln Riley is going to have to confront some very significant questions with his coaching staff.
We talk USC football with all of you each and every Monday night at 11 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock on the Pacific Coast. And, of course, Matt Zemek makes it all happen. We appreciate his contribution and being here every Monday night, and checks in when he can on the post-game show every Saturday night. Please check out Matt's work on Trojans Wire. USC, as I look at the stats right now, everybody typically goes to total defensive measures, but if you go to yards per play, it's even worse. USC 108 in the nation in yards per play given up on defense. Not a good number there.
And that goes to all the 3rd and 9, 10, 11 conversions that Cal got. I mean, and if you're going up against an elite passing game, all right, you're going to give up some 3rd and 9s, 3rd and 10s, but not against Cal. Like that is just eye-poppingly bad.
On a positive note, I would say in Jordan Addison and Mario Williams' absence, had we been doing, let's say, off-season previews of each game, and one of us said, well, USC is going to move to 8-1 on the season with a win over Cal, scoring 41 points, and they've got two receivers who are going to gain 100 yards. You'd say, okay, yeah, Mario Williams and Jordan Addison, but they've been able to step up with guys like Taj Washington and Michael Jackson. So they've shown the depth at the wide receiver position.
No question about it. And I think it's very clear that Taj Washington and Michael Jackson, you could also throw Kyle Ford in the mix. He had a really good game against Arizona. Those three guys have really stepped up in the absence of Mario Williams and Jordan Addison. And meanwhile, a lot of the members of the USC fan base, and I would certainly agree with them, like I think USC fans, have their finger on the pulse of this team. And I really agree with the kind of the general fan sentiment on this. Brendan Rice and Terrell Bynum need to play less, not more. Like Brendan Rice has been unreliable in terms of making catches. He usually drops a pass or two per game. And he also, you don't see him separate in open space the way Michael Jackson did, taking that short pass and scooting downfield. Taj Washington as well. Like Washington and Jackson are kind of these value added depth pieces at receiver who can make explosive plays, not just getting behind a defense on a long ball, but also taking the ball in open space and running with it after the catch, finding angles. You haven't seen any of that from Brendan Rice. Now, Brendan Rice made a few, catches in traffic again in the Arizona game, but the drop passes and the lack of high-end speed, he needs to be getting fewer snaps. Terrell Bynum also dropped a pass as well. Those two guys are not impressing, so we need to counterbalance the great play of Washington and also Michael Jackson and Kyle Ford. And we also need to make note of the fact that Terrell Bynum is not making the cut, and also Brendan Rice, and so like Jackson and Washington need to get more and more snaps. And Rice and Bynum need to get fewer snaps. So it'll be interesting to see if when Mario Williams and Jordan Addison come back, if, Brendan Rice and Bynum are still in the rotation. They really should not be. It should be, Addison and Williams first, and then Jackson and Washington, as the next two guys, and then Kyle Ford. Like those are clearly the top 5 receivers for USC. And I think the past few weeks have really sorted that out with Mario Williams and Jordan Addison injured.
All right. We will take your comments and questions in the live chat and take those directly to Matt. I know that you had noted Well, you pretty much covered some of the things that you had set up on Twitter tonight in regards to the discussions about Alex Grinch and Mario and Dante Williams. So here we go into a Colorado game that in some ways is going to be difficult to measure progress. Colorado's a 34-point dog at the Coliseum. And except for that effort against Cal, their lone Pac-12 win, of course, they are a winless team. So what are going to be your trouble spots, your awareness is going to go in what direction during this Friday night affair?
Starts with the secondary. Like, this is another opponent that USC's defense should really be able to feast on. You want to follow our friends at Buffalo's Wire, a Pac-12 partner of Trojans Wire, and they've noted that Jordan Tyson, Colorado's best receiver, he's out for this game. So like that is a big injury for Colorado. So like you not only are playing Colorado, but you're playing a weakened Colorado. So like if you can't do the job, if you can't perform basic tasks against this Colorado offense, this Colorado roster, like it is really a 5-alarm fire for the USC defense. So the secondary has to get its act in order. That's point number one. It's also for a chance for the linebackers, the backup linebackers, because I don't think Eric Gentry is going to play. If he's not, if he's, are there any questions about his health? You sit him out one more week so that you get him for UCLA. And what are you going to learn against Colorado? So I think that you sit Gentry if there's any question about him. If he's ready to go, fine, you play him. But if there are questions, you can afford to sit him. Like you're not going to lose to Colorado. So it's a chance for the backup linebackers though to just get sharper in terms of reading their keys, carrying out their assignments, because if they're needed against UCLA, like they need to be on their game. So like this is the dress rehearsal. Interesting little side note. I noticed over the weekend after the Georgia-Tennessee game that Kirby Smart mentioned about his Georgia team. Well, we were practicing really hard the past 2 weeks. They didn't have an off week in the middle of those 2 weeks. They were playing Florida. So like Kirby Smart was busting Florida's chops. But the point about mentioning that is that you can treat this game as part of your UCLA preparation, right? You do not need to do intensive game film for Colorado. You can already set in motion the game plan and your practice habits and your film study for UCLA. And you just the Colorado game is just part of it. It's helpful. This is a Friday game. You get that out of the way sooner. You get more rest for UCLA. But anyway, like this, you could say this is already UCLA prep time and Colorado is just going to be like a scrimmage as part of the run up to that. So the Kirby Smart remark about Tennessee preparation going through the Florida game reminded me of that. So that's what matters most. The other thing that USC fans really want to see, and anyone concerned with and who supports the program also wants to see this. This is a game in which Miller and Moss should be playing the fourth quarter because this game should be done. You stick a fork in this game late in the third quarter. USC should be up 30-35, and Miller and Moss needs to get his reps. Like this is where his teammates and his defense need to set up this game so that he gets some meaningful action. He's paid his dues. He's working hard. He's trying to stay ready. Obviously, we don't want K. Williams to get hurt. So, like, he deserves a fourth quarter, and we really need to see this team give him a fourth quarter by, smoking Colorado in the first 2.5 to 3 quarters. So that's the other thing a lot of USC fans want to see from this game. It's definitely something I want to see as well because Miller Moss deserves it for all the hard work that he's put in. There's one other thing to say in terms of the coaching staff. So we talked about Alex Grinch, talked about Dante Williams. The other thing is USC's butchered an onside kick in this game and also had a botched extra point in this game. There is no special teams coordinator on Lincoln Riley's staff. Now, I'm not saying there should be a special teams coordinator, but it's been pretty ragged for most of the season. But it really invites a fascinating question. Let's say hypothetically that Dante Williams should not be retained next year, just given the caliber of his coaching not rising to meet the level USC needs, and his recruiting chops aren't worth keeping him if he's not providing the actual quality of coaching USC needs. So a couple questions. One, do you replace Dante Williams with a special teams coordinator? That's one question. But the other question is, as much help as you need on this defense, maybe you just replace Dante Williams with another defensive coach and you don't commit to a special teams coordinator. But the question it invites regarding special teams is, who's the guy who multitasks? Who's the guy on this staff who can take the role of coaching a position group either on defense or offense, and who can also essentially handle the special teams? Is there a guy on this staff already that can really have one foot in each door, coaching a position group and coaching special teams? And I think Lincoln Riley really needs to drill deep on that. If he can't find a guy who can really do double duty on his staff, then he has to bite the bullet and hire a special teams coordinator. I don't think it's a settled question, because this defense needs better coaching. Everyone would agree on that. So I have a strong pull. I think an inclination. Like, I haven't decided this, but I think right now, if I'm leaning one way, I'm thinking you need to get another defensive coach to provide stronger player development, stronger coaching of technique. But if you really don't have a guy already on the staff who can handle special teams, you're going to have to use one of those 10 assistant slots for special teams coordinator. So there are 3 questions about the 2023 coaching staff: Grinch, Dante Williams, special teams coordinator. Now, I think Alex Grinch should definitely be retained. I'm on record as saying that, but I also think that, he is inviting questions as we get toward the end of the season. I think Dante Williams is a much more central example of, should you retain him or not? And then special teams coordinator. 3 really interesting coaching decisions for Lincoln Riley heading into the offseason, unless we really see marked improvement in all of these areas against UCLA.
So, Matt, you're on record as saying Alex Grinch should be retained for 2023. We're looking at a 3-game season plus a conference championship game, possibly, plus a postseason game. So we still have 5 games left, potentially. If this defense looks like it has the last few weeks as opposed to the previous weeks, could that opinion change?
It could. Like, if we see no real improvements, no sign of adjustments, then yes, like that will be a real question. I would say, pivoting to something else, moving away from the USC coaching staff. I don't know if you saw this yesterday, Mark, and for our viewers here in the Voice of College Football, but Van Fillinger, the star pass rusher for Utah, out for the season. And this is on top of all the other injuries that Utah is dealing with: Micah Bernard, Tavion Thomas. Dalton Kincaid is not 100%. Brant Queefy is out for the season. Cam Rising's not 100%. Utah didn't look great against Arizona. I mean, so, like, if you're going into the Utah-Oregon game, and obviously we'll have a lot more next week here on the Voice of College Football as we preview Showdown Saturday in the Pac-12. That'll be, November 19th. We'll have a lot more on next week's USC live show. But right now, with Fillinger out for Utah, like, it's looking pretty solid that Oregon is a clear favorite in that game with all the injuries Utah is carrying. That's a huge loss for that defense. And, Oregon's offensive line is both good and it's been healthy. You have not had any significant health problems for that Oregon offensive line. So really, the vantage point right now is Oregon's looking great for that Utah game. And that's good news for USC, because a Utah loss, USC has the head-to-head loss against Utah. So the Ducks could clear Utah out of the way. So that is looking better for USC. It's all about UCLA and being able to find a way to win against the Bruins. So that is a notable aspect of the Utah-Oregon game to pass along to our viewers here.
We appreciate everybody being here for our USC show that we bring you weekly on Monday night with Matt. Join Matt on Trojans Wire and his weekly podcast, Get Off My Pylon. You can catch that, of course, on the College Gridiron Coast to Coast Network, and my podcast as well, as you want to get prepared, of course, for joining the Big Ten Paradigm. Friday night games in the Pac-12. Certainly, the Pac-12 plays more Thursday and Friday games than the other four conferences possibly combined. I know the ACC.
ACC is the other one.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't see much in the Big 12, SEC, or Big 10. It's the Pac and the ACC, really.
Which is a good move in regards to national exposure. You have exclusive windows there.
Absolutely. I mean, the main thing is, USC fans are well aware of, being brutally treated in terms of Friday night games. The ultimate example was several years ago when USC played Texas in a nationally televised Saturday game that went to overtime, and USC had to play at Washington State the week after. Like, that was horrible because, USC was playing a high-end opponent one week and then had the weeknight road game the next week. Now here, you have a home game against Cal and then a Friday night game against Colorado. That's fine. Like, USC is not being meaningfully disadvantaged, but that Texas-Washington State short week several years ago, Alabama, Oklahoma, Ohio State would never, ever, ever be treated that way. So that's a sore spot. And Mark, so like we were talking about scheduling Friday night games, time slots, kickoff times, perfect segue into the other really big topic that I wanted to hit on here at the Voice of College Football. So for USC fans who didn't catch the news earlier on Monday, there's been a 6-day hold for Showdown Saturday, the two big games, USC, UCLA, Utah, Oregon. All right. That in itself is not a surprise. The networks obviously want to wait to see, what happens this weekend. They want it to be official that those two games are going to have maximum value. That's not a problem. That's not a surprise. But here's the problem. All right. The Fox and ESPN, who have final say on this, and that's part of the problem in the Pac-12, of course, giving the networks too much leverage in all of this. It's been announced that one of those two games is going to be 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 Eastern on Fox. The other one at 7:30 Pacific, that's 10:30 Eastern on ESPN. All right, so let's just process that for a moment. First off, the ESPN, if it does carry, ESPN will carry one of the two games at 10:30 Eastern. So that means Chris Fowler is not going to be calling that game. He calls the primetime game, or he might call Illinois, Michigan. Chris Fowler has called a few day games earlier this season. He called the Ohio State, Michigan State game earlier this season. That was a day game. So Fowler's not going to call USC, UCLA. He has not called a single USC game this year. Like, that's a shocker. You certainly would have thought that Chris Fowler was going to call at least one Lincoln Riley USC game. So we're going to get through the UCLA game without him making a single call. And we don't know the television situation yet for the Notre Dame game 1 week later. So that's one thing. But here's here are the bigger problems. One is that imagine USC, UCLA in a year when both teams are really good, playing for a spot in the Pac-12 championship game, most likely, and you're dumping that late at night when the East Coast is not going to see it or is not going to stay up for it. You're going to do that to USC, UCLA when the rivalry is good. I mean, we've suffered through so many, unremarkable, unimportant nationally USC, UCLA games over the past decade and a half. And the year when they're finally good, like, this is going to be the biggest USC, UCLA game since 2005. When UCLA and USC both entered that game with no more than UCLA, I think, had one loss and USC was unbeaten. Biggest USC UCLA game in 17 years, and if it's on ESPN, it gets dumped late at night. That is just absolutely horrible. And then for our Oregon fans and our Utah fans who are watching here on the Voice of College Football, let's say USC UCLA gets the primetime game on Fox. It's the same thing for the Utes and the Ducks. Utes Ducks, a 10:30 Eastern kick. So, like, you're guaranteed to have at least one of those two huge games dumped in the late night slot. That is abominable. That is atrocious. And given the time slots that I mentioned, one game at 5, one game at 7:30, there's overlap. So the second game is going to be starting when the first game is going to be late in the third quarter. So like even if you are wanting to watch both games, you're going to have to miss one of them, a quarter and a half of the second game, so that you watch the end of the first one, assuming it's competitive. Just a total disaster. Like you couldn't even have the earlier games start at 4 with the late game starting at 7:30 Pacific time. You couldn't even have a 3.5 hour separation. It's just a 2.5 hour separation. My goodness, just a total disaster for what was supposed to be, this huge day for the Pac-12. One game's just going to be in the middle of the night, and there's going to be overlap between the two games. Just a total train wreck, and a reminder of how bad this television deal was, in terms of not locking in certain contractual protections. So ESPN, Disney, they are not contractually mandated to have a certain amount of 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific games. And Mark, as a college football historian, as do I, that classic college football, old time religion was Michigan, Ohio State at noon, USC, UCLA at 3:30. Played in bright California sunshine with Keith Jackson, Frank Broyles, in that brilliant light. That's when the USC UCLA game at its best, and certainly when the rivalry was elite and nationally important. You play it in the daytime. So like this is just a total gut punch, and yet it's the 78 trillionth reminder of why USC and UCLA are moseying on off to the Big Ten.
Wow, a lot of things come to mind here. The first one would be, I wonder who between Fox and ESPN has the selection to make, because I would think that network would take USC, UCLA.
Probably. But I don't know if in terms of Fox and ESPN, which network has first pick. I guess that since the primetime slot belongs to Fox, I guess one would think in a rational world that Fox does get the first choice. But like this isn't rational. Like nothing about this does make sense. So I would lean toward that interpretation, but I don't know that for a fact. I do know that with ESPN having the late night slot, you're not going to get a Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit. Now, by the way, it is technically true that ABC had a USC in prime time in week 2, but Reese Davis, not Fowler, called that game because Chris Fowler was calling the U.S. Open singles finals that weekend. So you can kind of say that's a technicality, but really, we were all expecting Chris Fowler to have a USC call by this point, and UCLA felt like a natural choice given how big this game is going to be. Nope, still not going to have one. And like if you're USC, you counted on Lincoln Riley to give you this front stage visibility, and yet ESPN continues to marginalize USC like this. It's really a lot to digest, but all of it enormously frustrating.
And you wonder if ESPN is marginalizing USC and UCLA because of their move to the Big Ten, and they'll no longer be on their network. So why not get a jump start on lessening the brand as much as they can possibly control?
This is how conspiracy theories are allowed to continue, much like Pac-12 refs. When you continue to see horrible episodes, that's how conspiracy theories continue. And may I mention Michael Mothershed, the Pac-12 head official who mangled the USC-Arizona game. He mangled the Oregon State-Washington game this past Friday, called 12 men on the field when there were just 11. He said it's the end of the first half when actually it was just the end of the first quarter. They called targeting on the wrong guy. And this is the same guy who just, completely mishandled the USC-Arizona situation. So, just like no one's minding the store, no quality control, no supervision. Like, hello, administrators, anybody home? Anybody minding the fort? Nope. And like, this is how conspiracy theories persist.
The one thing I will say about the scheduling of the games that seems unique to the Pac-12 and the West Coast is that The other time zones and those conferences that are related to those time zones obviously look at primetime games as being the ultimate, as being the prize. This is where you usher the games to primetime. Now, that's been changed and altered to a certain extent by Fox initiating the big noon kickoff and countering what ESPN and ABC do in primetime. And we've actually seen some marginalized primetime games on ABC in recent weeks with the likes of Minnesota and Penn State. And there have been a few others, Clemson and Boston College. But again, primetime is where it's at. That said, that's an East Coast primetime slot. That's there's overlap and it's not, doesn't work out perfectly in terms of time zones, but that's kind of a Midwest time slot as they go into Central Time and so forth. The West Coast, however, you would think most of the viewership for those two games that you're talking about are going to come from the Pacific time zone. Therefore, you would think that there would be some cachet or some relevance and some benefit to playing prime time in the Pacific time zone, because that's where most of the viewership theoretically should come from.
And I think that works early in the season, when the whole national focus isn't revolving around a select few games. The earlier weeks of a college football season, especially if you don't have like a huge national showdown between top teams like Notre Dame, Ohio State, week 1, like that's kind of the exception to the rule. But for the most part, in the early weeks with non-conference games, a lot of them unremarkable. Yeah, like having more late games to showcase Western teams and it being the early in the season and fans wanting to see what their teams look like. That makes sense. But gosh, USC UCLA used to be a national event, as I remarked earlier. And so having that prominent in the middle of the day so that it doesn't get kicked late, that's one thing. And the other thing is the College Football Playoff Committee. Like, whether you think USC or UCLA are likely to get in the playoff, that's secondary. It's just the fact that those two teams are in playoff consideration. The winner of that game will be in the hunt for the playoff heading into the end of November and probably early December, playing most likely Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. So you want the committee and you want people in the East to see what is possibly your best team, what is possibly your conference champion, and therefore your main candidate for the playoff. You want to see the committee watching that game, and like there's no law or rule that says that the committee has to stay up until 2:15 a.m. Eastern time watching your game. It just invites the committee to give a little bit less attention to that. And so if this gets into a really close contest with Dabo Swinney and Clemson, and we know that the committee has made decisions based on TV, at least in part, in the past few years, it opens the door. It opens the door to conspiracy theories, and in a way that we didn't have to be here. So I go back to the point that just USC UCLA was always a daytime showcase when the rivalry was at its height, and there were a lot of great.
Sure.
For decades, it was an important game. It was an important game in '67 with Gary Beban and O.J. Simpson. It was important throughout the '70s, especially when Terry Donahue came to UCLA in the mid '70s, and he went against John Robinson. Had lots of really great games in the late '70s through 1981, and then you still had some moments in the late 1980s. With Donahue's teams going against those good Larry Smith teams. So for a few decades, like it was just appointment television. And it was, crucially, it was a part of college football culture to have that game played in the daytime. Like that was the time that conferred prominence on USC, UCLA, because it was late in the season, because the game mattered. So like late in the season, Mark, I think that, with the shorter days, we just had the time change, it gets colder and darker earlier. The idea that a game is played in the middle of the day in November, it's a very different dynamic compared to September when it's still light, pretty late in the day, and it doesn't carry the same psychological weight, that the November darkness does. So like that is another thing to recommend in terms of having USC and UCLA play in the daytime.
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, I grew up in the Midwest. That Ohio State Michigan game was everything, and it would go right into USC UCLA, which I certainly had to watch that game as well. And it was almost as though, and I can't say this for a fact, but I know that ABC had the Ohio State Michigan game through 81. I started watching in the late 70s, had it through 81, and then CBS, Brent Musburger, Ara Parsegan would call.
Yep.
And they had the Ohio State Michigan game for about 5 years, and then it went back to ABC. And I think actually because of the contracts that the Pac-12 was tied to that switch, so it even moved from ABC to CBS for 5 years and went back, meaning that the two games together were almost a package deal as an offshoot to the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, moving from ABC to CBS and then back to ABC. So yeah, that's obviously been changed and altered and hasn't stayed together in the last couple of decades. But for many years, that was the way that TV contract went, and how that flow moved from the Midwest to the West Coast, and was just magical.
It certainly was, and it points to how we've college football has not found ways to retain those certain cultural traditions, those things that have mattered. Now, I mean, it's retained Michigan and Ohio State at noon, like that. It's done a good job of that, but the USC UCLA piece has not really been retained.
Yeah, that game's been played all over the place, but never that I can recall at 10:30 Eastern time.
It was late, I think, when Rick Neuheisel coached the Bruins, and
Really?
UCLA was not very good. USC won by like 50 points. I think that was a late night game. Once or twice it's been a 10:30 kick over the past 15 years. Not usually.
You mentioned the college football playoff rankings. I made the statement, and certainly I'm on all the time, and people can call me whenever they want. So I'm not going to go too far into my thoughts about where I stand on this, and hopefully we get Matt back. I believe he had an issue there and had to jump off. But college football playoff rankings, and we'll relate this to USC, of course, and the rest of the Pac-12. Matt, you good?
Yeah, just had a little hit up there. Technology.
So I was just going into the college football playoff rankings. Of course, we're going to see our second edition coming out on Tuesday night. Want to remind everyone that we've got a watch party on the main channel that you can catch. And actually, it'll be right here on the USC channel. We simulcast to all the impacted teams. So we'll be here at 7 o'clock Eastern time, 4 o'clock Pacific time to talk, to watch the unveiling and then get your responses. But my initial response and reaction to what mattered about the initial college football playoff rankings, and we can certainly relate this to USC and the Pac-12, would be where TCU was placed. I think that was the biggest statement that the committee made, number one. And then leading into this week, I want to see, my thought process was, okay, the Georgia-Tennessee loser, how far are they going to drop them to possibly justify them to stay in the running? And if they drop no more than, like, let's say from 1 to 5 in Tennessee's case, they were the number one ranked team in the country. If they only drop to 5, then they're in perfect position to win out and possibly maintain a college football playoff spot. So, what are you curious to see on Tuesday night?
I'm not really curious about these ranking shows until the very end. I think the next to last show, so after Ohio State, Michigan, after Thanksgiving. I think that's going to be the key, because then we find out how far the Ohio State Michigan loser drops, and you have that team going up against what is likely to be an 11-1 Tennessee. That's when it's really going to get spicy. And of course, we're just going to see if TCU can go 13-0. If TCU can't go 13-0, like, does anyone think that a one-loss Michigan or a one-loss Tennessee is going to stay behind Big 12 champion 12-1 TCU? Highly doubt it. And of course, we have 2014 already as a basis for historical evaluation here. So really, it's where the Ohio State Michigan loser is slotted. That's a key question, but we're not going to know that for the next few weeks. So really, to me, it's just the next to last show and the last show. Those are the two that are most worth following, because like the puzzle seems pretty clear here, that Notre Dame cleared Clemson out of the way, like just in terms of an unbeaten team, and TCU now has to find a way to beat Texas and Baylor and eventually go 13-0. I think most people would say TCU is unlikely to do that, because it's crazy about TCU. Like, this team has earned its place and made 2 comebacks of 17 points or more, but still, the opposing team's quarterback gets hurt in basically every game TCU plays. I've never seen anything like it. That just the frogs aren't plagued; they are visiting the plague. A little book of Exodus here on the Voice of College Football. TCU's opponents just get plagued every week. It is just absolutely insane. So you'd have to think that TCU's luck is going to eventually run out, either against Texas or Baylor. And by the way, I wrote about this at Trojans Wire. We have the exquisite scenario this week. Steve Sarkisian could help USC make the college football playoff. Now, what a bowl of cherries that is, that Sark could ride to USC's rescue if Texas can beat TCU. You just can't make that stuff up. But anyway, like, TCU has the chance to get in, but probably isn't likely to get in. And if that's the case, I think it's really pretty clear in terms of 3 spots. Georgia and Tennessee, SEC gets 2, and then the Ohio State Michigan winner. And then the 4th spot is really going to be between the Ohio State Michigan loser and the Pac-12 champion, with Dabo and Clemson might get in just because of TV clout. I think that the Clemson's profile is so much weaker now because of Wake and Syracuse both struggling, that like Clemson's resume has taken on a lot of water. So just in terms of merit, I think Clemson's well below. But in terms of the television side and the fact that ESPN is still calling the shots with this, you can't fully discount Clemson. But really, for the 4th spot, it's the Ohio State Michigan loser against, this is assuming TCU loses. It's the Ohio State Michigan loser against a 12-1 Pac-12 champion. I think that's going to be the real. We're going to wind up with that being the ultimate debate for the 4th spot in the playoff.
Meaning we could have 2 non-champions make the field, possibly.
That's right. And we've had non-champions before, so
I don't believe we've had 2.
Now, I'm not sure about 2, but like sure. It wouldn't shock me, like, because of the brand names and because of the alignments of the teams.
And I do believe
here's the thing, Mark. Here's the thing, Mark, in terms of how we could get the Ohio State Michigan loser into the field, even against a 12-1 Pac-12 champion. It's if Oregon is the Pac-12 champion, right? Because if Oregon is the 12-1 Pac-12 champion, and that's the best alternative to 11-1 Michigan. Let's say if Michigan loses to Ohio State, it's between 11-1 Michigan and 12-1 Oregon for the 4th spot. If Georgia is the number 1 seed, the committee would have to at least wrestle with the idea of, do we want Oregon, Georgia part 2? And the alternative could be Georgia, Michigan, which, we had that last year, but of course you don't have, the 2 teams didn't play this year. And so I could certainly envision 11-1 Michigan being taken over 12-1 Oregon, just because we already saw Oregon and Georgia. So that is the thing that Oregon fans and also Pac-12 fans need to brace for in terms of how the committee might operate. Because I don't think you can put Oregon. I don't think you can see. Well, even if you did seed Oregon 3rd for TV purposes, then you have Georgia against Tennessee in a rematch. So Like if you were to choose between a Georgia-Tennessee rematch and a Georgia-Oregon rematch, you'd take Oregon because it's not a conference rematch. So it could get really tangled if Oregon is the Pac-12 champion. There will be some real discussions about who should be the number 4 seed.
And boy, it could get really sticky if LSU would run the table and win the SEC.
It would, yeah, it would. And you know, I think that because LSU, LSU would have the win over Georgia, but of course Tennessee dismantled LSU on the road in Baton Rouge. Yeah,
do you leave out the SEC champion that beat Alabama and Georgia?
What an exquisite dilemma that would be. I do think that under that scenario, you have to have Tennessee in, and it really becomes an LSU versus Georgia question, not an LSU versus Tennessee question. Like that score of that game was 40-13, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Like you can't have Tennessee out. You can't under that scenario. It would be
And
LSU or Georgia. That would be the choice.
And then if Georgia's 12-1 because they lost the SEC championship game, you can't leave them out because they dismantled Tennessee.
That would be the thing to wrestle with. And it really could be that you leave the SEC champion LSU out and 2 other teams are kept in. Holy moly. But that's college football for you. Like it is, this sport has a way of always tossing out a new scenario that no one imagined or accounted for. And that is why, Mark, and we talked about this in the past, that is why the 2014 playoff, say whatever else you want about it, it should have said, this is the number 1 priority. This is the number 2 priority. This is the number 3. If we had that, you avoid a lot of the ambiguity. But of course, ESPN wants these Tuesday shows to be filled with drama, spice it up, get people arguing about everything, get people mad. That's been the business model. That's the path ESPN chose. Here we are. Oh, Dale, Oregon is not losing this weekend to Washington. Like you saw the Washington-Oregon State game, right? That was not a very well played game. Both teams were tripping over their shoelaces for most of that game. And of course, Washington turns into a pumpkin away from Seattle. Oregon huge.
That's a good point by Search.
It is.
Lost Michigan non-champion with their awful non-conference slate in which they played no one. And then Oregon obviously gets penalized for playing Georgia.
Yep. I'm not saying Michigan should be elevated. Let me make myself clear. But I do think the committee is going to give a lot of consideration to Michigan. So what should be and what will be, 2 different things. All right. I am not recommending that the committee take Michigan over Oregon if we get to that scenario.
And then I don't know who is necessarily the stronger candidate as a non-champion, Michigan or Ohio State, because Ohio State has the better non-conference win, of course, over Notre Dame that's gaining some weight.
Yeah, the Notre Dame win looks better now. Yep.
Yeah, but Michigan will have lost that game against Ohio State on the road. So there's a bit of a...
And it really gets to a 2006 style scenario where Michigan lost that game close. And so there was a lot of sentiment in favor of an Ohio State Michigan rematch in Glendale.
Oh yeah,
instead of Florida. So like it at least was a conversation. So if Michigan does lose to Ohio State, it needs to be close. It needs to look pretty good. There need to be style points. If we see a Ohio State boat race Michigan the way the last time in Columbus unfolded, then Michigan would be cooked pretty obviously.
And if I'm not mistaken, Michigan was number 2 even after the loss against Ohio State in the AP poll, but they were jumped by Florida after they beat Arkansas in the SEC championship game.
Yes.
All right. Our USC show comes your way every Monday night at 8 o'clock Pacific time. And of course, we've got the most people on at the end of the show. So you know what you need to do. You wait for the video to post. It should be available almost instantaneously and ready for you to go. So for the time that you've missed, you can go back and watch that portion. So make it a point to be back here on time next week, 11 Eastern, 8 Pacific, with Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire. What was the big focus of the podcast this week? Get off my pylon.
Talking about Alex Grinch, talking about USC's defense, because, hey, Utah won comfortably, Oregon won comfortably. UCLA didn't win all that comfortably, but, more comfortably than USC did. USC cut it close the most of the 4 Pac-12 contenders. So since we covered the Pac-12, that was our lead story. And also, SMU 77, Houston 63, is that going to be USC UCLA? and this is a good final note for USC UCLA, which just kind of a teaser before we focus on that focus on that game in full next week here on our USC live show. It's going to be all about UCLA and also the Utah Oregon game. If you set the over under for USC UCLA at 100, no one would laugh. No one would say, "Oh, that's a joke. That's ridiculous. That's way too high." People would take that seriously. So it's just going to be fascinating to see just how high those two offenses are going to climb and how much, if anything, the defenses can bring to the table in that game. So we'll focus on it in full on next week's show, but just kind of a little nugget to toss out there. Just want to say before we close up shop here that, hey, I've written about Alex Grinch, Dante Williams, and those coaching questions that we talked about earlier in the show. So if you jumped on midway through the show, we talked a lot about Grinch and Dante Williams in the first half of the show, but I have a lot of analysis at Trojans Wire, just exploring the questions, not so much making recommendations. I mean, I do offer my opinion, but I'm trying to offer the pros and the cons and just weighing everything. So that's at Trojans Wire. And I'm going to have more on the fact that USC UCLA could be a late night kickoff. Going to have more on that on Tuesday, and a lot of other juicy topics coming your way. And we're going to cover the Colorado game, but really going to try and do some think piece type stuff and some big picture questions as the week continues here at Trojans Wire. So you'll want to follow the website for that, leading into UCLA week next week.
And the Pac-12 show is Wednesday night at 7:30 Pacific time. And of course, we've got our watch party all lined up for 7 o'clock Eastern time on Tuesday, right here at the Voice of College Football. Matt, thank you so much for making this happen each and every week.
Thanks, Mark. Have a great week. And remember, USC plays Friday, in case anyone's wondering. So our post-game show with Tony Altamore, Tim Prangley, and Rick Anaya Friday night. So you want to make sure that you move it up a night to catch those guys on Friday.